Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. Chris is not with us this week, couldn't be here. We'll have him back next week. So this is going to be, I don't even know, like the 10th episode, no, maybe like 6th quarantine episode that we've been doing here. So I'm constantly mixing up the format. We have a couple of sort of routines that we do. We do a sort of, normally the show is about the box office top 10, right? And we can't do that now because there is no box office. So we've been trying to do some different things. What I'll start out here this week will be release date shuffle. That's kind of our new routine that we have. Just talk about where movies are moving. They're moving all over the place, all over the board. It sounds like movie theaters are opening in, I think, in Texas this week, maybe. They're doing temperature checks. It's like you're getting checked by the TSA, but they are opening. So there is some glimmer of hope here that 2 months into this sort of pandemic crisis that movie theaters might be coming back. But what's happening is most movies that were scheduled for April through, I guess, the end of the year are being shuffled around and moved around. So we'll talk about what's going on with that. We also really need to cover what happened this week. This sort of war or conflict started between Universal Studios, or Universal Films to be specific, AMC, the movie theater owners. There's sort of a war between movie studios and movie theaters right now over what's being called premium VOD. And this war was sparked by Trolls World Tour, which is the strangest movie to start like a civil war in an industry. But it has happened. And so they fired back and forth this week about what and how films will be released once theaters get reopened here. Is premium VOD, putting a movie on streaming first for exclusive pricing, like $20 a pop for a rental, is that the future of movies overall? Or is that just a sort of sideshow right now as the pandemic is keeping people in their homes? So that we'll talk about that conflict in depth and what happened there and the sort of the results of that little skirmish that happened this week. It was very quick back and forth. Like every day they were shooting messages and shots back and forth to each other. So a little bit of box office drama for you. We'll talk about the DEG most watched at home top 20. We can't do the box office top 10, but we can do what people are watching at home. Digital Entertainment Group is sort of the industry standard for data collecting what is sold at home digitally, and then also what people rent on VOD. So we'll talk about what people are watching in their houses during the sort of shut-in, shut-down. Deadline followed up its most profitable film top, what was it, like 30 list this year? It was a big one this year, with their biggest flop. So we'll talk about the top 5 biggest flops. I'll sort of guess what I thought was on the rest of the list because they only did the top 5 flops. I'll throw out my suggestions, which should also be in that top 10. Then we will talk about the biggest profits from small movies that Deadline also put out this week. So a lot to talk about. Probably no time machine this week, unfortunately. There's just too much other stuff to talk about. So hopefully maybe next week we'll get back in the timeline or time machine. And then hopefully, maybe in like a month, movie theaters might reopen in multiple places. I don't really know though. Like it's very touch and go. It's super, like Texas, like one theater's opening, I think. AMC, Alamo, which is obviously huge in Texas, out of Austin, they're sort of like, no, we're not doing anything right now. Like maybe in a few weeks we'll think about it. So it's very early in sort of the turning back on the light stage of this sort of economic revival or opening, whatever you want to call it. But I think movie theaters probably will start opening with really strict rules, I would say around middle of June, maybe July. And then we'll see what's actually out there. So let's talk about what's changed in terms of release dates here. Lionsgate had a huge swath of updates. So John Wick 4 moves from May 21st of next year. It was on the same date as Matrix 4, which would have been very strange to have 2 Keanu Reeves movies going head to head, the movie theater. That has been moved to Memorial Day weekend, May 27th, 2022. So not next year, but the year after that. So that one's a year move. The Saw reboot Spiral, that's been pushed back to May 21st. It basically took the John Wick 4 spot of next year. So Spiral will open on May 21st, 2020. Ryan Reynolds and Sam Jackson are back in Hitman's Bodyguard sequel. It's called The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. That was supposed to come out this year in August. That's the first I'm hearing of this movie. And I covered it a lot when the original came out. So I was kind of surprised I hadn't heard anything about this sequel already. It must have already been shot and in the can, maybe, if it's coming out in August. I don't know. But that got pushed a year. So that's no longer this August. It's going to be August 2021. Sony's Nightingale, World War II drama starring Ellie and Dakota Fanning. Supposed to come out at the end of the year. That got pushed to another year. So that's going to be December 22nd, 2021, a Christmas opening for The Nightingale. World War II dramas, I don't know. Are those played out? Allied bombed. Fury didn't do all that well. I feel like World War II movies just are not there anymore, but we'll see how that one does. It could be, sounds like a prestige film to me, well, with a Christmas opening. And then a new announcement here. Paramount has announced a new Transformers movie will come out June 24th, 2022. So 2 years from now, essentially. Although they have two movies in competition with each other, there's two new Transformers movies being developed. There's one that seems like more of a mainline Transformers film, and then there's one in the Bumblebee universe. And that kind of reminds me a lot in talking about how Bumblebee performed okay. I can't remember exactly how it did, but I talked about it a lot in terms of it being a pivot for the Transformers universe, because the movie before that, kind of mainline Transformer, that final sequel there, did not perform very well, at least not to expectations, not to what the past film pattern. And so Bumblebee felt fresh and new, and a new path to sort of move the Transformers cinematic universe forward. My guess is they probably go with the Bumblebee movie, because I think it's going to have a bigger draw in a couple of years than another Transformers movie. And also King of Staten Island, this is kind of big news and will lead into the sort of the VOD wars that happened last week. Judd Apatow announced that the Pete Davidson comedy that was supposed to come out in theaters this June 19th to be exact, from Universal, is going to go premium VOD on June 12th. So a week early and on a completely different format, which kind of leads into the big kerfuffle that happened this week. Well, look who walked in from out of the cold. Chris is here. I was wrong. Chris, where were you? Tell us where you were.
Oh my God. I walking in late because I was spending the afternoon building a teeter-totter for my sons that, according to the instruction manual, was supposed to take 1 to 2 hours. And of course, because I'm an English major, it took me like 75 years.
Are you good with IKEA stuff?
Oh my God, no.
I'm very good with IKEA stuff. I don't know why. Although it took me an hour. It took me 2 hours to build one bar stool once. And I was like, this takes too long. Although I watched a really cool movie, A Brief Affair, while I was doing it. So it was worth it. Okay, so let's dive into this. So we talked about the release date shuffle. We left off with King of Staten Island from Universal, which is leading us into this sort of VOD wars that took place this week. It's been kind of interesting because it was very quick. I think it was like Tuesday morning. Universal, obviously put out Trolls World Tour. We've talked about that on the show. They put out Trolls World Tour on PVOD, premium VOD, for $20. $20 you can rent it for 48 hours. And Chris, you did this, right?
We sure did. And it was really awful. And I'm glad I didn't go to the theater. But that said, it seems like Universal is taking that kind of stuff probably too literally.
Yeah, I think it's a special case, a special scenario. Did you feel like it, like the $20 having your family sit there and watch it? Did you feel like it was a good deal?
I do have to admit, like, I feel like it's definitely not as memorable as the experience of going to the theater, of course. And one of the upsides, even when it's a really bad movie like that, and you're just going for your kids, like, at least you get like quality time away from home. Whereas, for the purposes of VOD, it's more like just a glorified, let's see what's on Netflix kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like he was excited. It was his birthday. And that was another reason we dropped the 20. But,
so it was special.
Right. Yeah. But like, if it was like, I mean, Scoob is coming out on VOD in 2 weeks and they're like, so like, I'm not going to pay $20 for that, I don't think.
Well, Universal says that you are. So basically what happened here is there's an article in the Wall Street Journal where someone got the numbers of how the Trolls did. I'm sure Universal leaked them to them, whatever. That stuff works. And it made $95 million in the first 19 days of premium VOD release. $95 million is a lot of money. Especially when you take into account that on VOD rentals, the studio takes about 80% of that. As opposed to a movie theater ticket, well, they only take half. So the first Trolls, I think it was like, a few years ago, did $120 million at the box office in the first 19 days. But the studio only got half of that. So they got $60 million. Here with VOD, it made less on VOD, but they make more money because they get a bigger cut. So they made about like $77 million so far on Trolls World Tour, which is amazing. And then the Universal CEO put his foot in his mouth and said, as soon as theaters reopen, we expect to release movies on both formats. Which I don't know exactly what he implied there, but the industry thought he meant one thing, he might have meant another, but they basically thought that he was going to start releasing films, he thought he was going to start releasing films on VOD and in the theater at the same time. AMC freaks out. And AMC is the biggest movie theater chain in the United States and Canada. They're massive. They're huge. You probably go to an AMC. They basically took that as like a threat to their business and immediately sent a letter the same day, I think, like 4 or 5 hours later, saying, therefore, effective immediately, AMC will no longer play any Universal movies in any of our theaters in the United States, Europe, or Middle East. This policy affects any and all Universal movies per se, goes into effect today, and as our theaters reopened, it is not some hollow or ill-considered threat. So AMC bans all of Universal immediately within 5 hours of the CEO of Universal basically saying, hey, yeah, we might put out new movies on PVOD and try to put them in theaters at the same time. And so the history here is that a premium VOD has always been this idea that has been thrown around, but anytime when the studio tries to do it, I think the last time they really made a push on this was probably 2011, I think, when they tried to put out Tower Heist. Do you remember this movie?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Eddie Murphy, Ben Stiller, was Vince Vaughn in that? Maybe not.
It was all-star cast though, for sure.
Yeah, great cast. So what they tried to do then, this is Universal too. They're always trying to push the boundaries here. They tried to put Tower Heist on VOD for $60. $60 to rent it 3 weeks after it premiered in theaters. And then the response, so dumb. And the response was exactly the same. Every single movie theater is like, we're banning this film or banning all of your films if you keep doing this. If you even try to do it. And then Universal backed down immediately. And that's kind of what happened here, right? Like Universal, I think, was testing the waters a bit with his statement, or maybe he was just speaking off the cuff. But they responded, I think, later that night. This is all happening in a 24-hour period. We absolutely believe in theatrical experience and made no statement to the contrary. As we stated earlier, going forward, we expect to release feature films directly to theaters, as well as PVOD when that distribution outlet makes sense. So they back down. And so I at this point, as someone, what do you think of this so far? Like this sort of scenario, what's happening going back and forth? What's your gut read on it?
I don't know. It seems like, on the one hand, I feel like probably the most logical reaction to this is like Universal, jumped the gun too soon and was like super happy that, they were the only movie studio right now to have good news. Yeah. And they just got trigger happy. But I also think that there's a fair point to be made here that, AMC, or was it the National Association of Theater Owners? Which one said, hey, this isn't fair. Like, this is basically the only new entertainment people have available right now.
Yeah, that was NATO. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, that seems to be, like, the key reason why you can't compare. It's like comparing apples and oranges, right?
Yeah.
But then there is a part of me that thinks, like, if this is how good of a response they're getting with something so trashy at like Trolls World Tour, like how more appropriate is that in the age of the internet for the movie called Trolls to literally troll the theater industry with its release on VOD, right? Yeah. So like, can you imagine, like, I'm very curious to see a non kind of B or C grade family movie do something like this. Well, like what? Like you mentioned King of Staten Island.
Yeah,
right?
That could be a big first test, I think, for PVOD.
Yeah,
I think it's rated R comedy.
Yeah, so I like that could be. I also would be interested to see if something even bigger, like I don't know, like they keep pushing things back, but I don't even know what is still scheduled. Like what if we have a second wave of this and Disney tries to gamble and say, let's try it with Mulan. It's possible.
There's
right?
been talk of that.
Possible.
Yeah, there's been talk of Mulan maybe going to a streaming platform first. Yeah, I mean, I think that like it's weird. It's one of the things that I always thought was going to come a lot sooner than it has. Like premium VOD is something that just makes sense, right? Like 60 days out from when a movie gets released, yeah, it probably should be streaming somewhere. And maybe, yeah, you charge a little bit extra, but they've just been sort of set in stone with this 90-day release window. And at 90 days, you pay $6 to rent it for 48 hours. And that's what it's been like for the last 15 years, essentially. And that has stayed steady through Netflix, rising to the prominence that it has now. So it's kind of like, I think it's just these conflicts were building up. And then in this pandemic shutdown, it's all getting let loose. And then a lot of people came to AMC was first out of the gate to be like, nope, we're banning you completely. National Association of Theater Owners basically backed them up. Then the International Union of Cinemas also backed them up, basically saying that, like, yes, AMC's right. It wasn't the sort of like stark language that AMC had, we're banning you, but it was basically like theaters are really important. This decision by Universal and their language doesn't really make any sense. And then Regal, the second biggest theater owner, kind of joins in on this beatdown on Universal like 2 days later, like a late cheap shot. They said, we make it clear again that we will not be showing movies that fail to respect the windows. That's the release window, the 90-day window. Universal's move is completely inappropriate and certainly has nothing to do with good faith, business practice, partnership, and transparency. I love these corporate fights. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah, you can just imagine the execs just like getting rock hard putting up these presents.
And then like they probably all get like a martini together later. Like it's all kind of BS. And then
a digital martini though.
Yeah, digital martini on Zoom. And so the final sort of like, I think Universal surrendered with this statement from the CEO. I would expect that consumers will return to theaters and will be part of that, or we will be part of that. I also expect that PVOD is going to be a part of that in some way. It's not a replacement. It's going to be a complementary element. So kind of like mashing his words together a little bit there. I don't know. How do you think this is going to play out? How do you see this happening as theaters reopen?
Well, I mean, I feel like at this point we need to also bring into the conversation the kind of big news this past few days from states like Georgia reopening, and basically the headline, at least on Twitter, which as we know is a very hyperbolic version of it, but like
Twitter facts.
I think it's a fair point. Who's going to undergo the extreme measures they're going to implement to bring movie theaters back?
100%.
Like, I'm not going to do a full body cavity search for Trolls World Tour, and I can't imagine many other people are either. And I'm somebody that's like a diehard like theater goer. I've been like, that's been like my primary preferred activity since I was born.
Yeah.
And still, like, one of the only things I can still do in quarantine that I couldn't before is just like enjoy a movie. So like when it comes down to it, like I'm starting to have these really kind of existential thoughts, like what essentially is the difference? Is it worth the risk to bring my family to basically a larger version of my living room?
Kierkegaard over here, like doubt, terror and doubt. Yeah, I think that I think that you bring up a really good point. And this is something that I've gone through multiple times as someone, I've been doing this podcast for like 3 years, and you would think someone like me would go to the theater all the time. No. When I started this podcast, I went to the theater like once every 3 months, tops. I almost never went. I just didn't like being around people. I just wanted to watch movies on my own. And if I did go to the theater, I would go alone, and I would go when there was almost nobody else there. And that's how I saw most of my movies in the theater. And so, unless it's the holidays. So there's definitely, for me, there's sort of like, well, why is there? But then there became this draw to go to the theater and see something on the big screen. And right before the pandemic happened, and I think you're an A-list person too, right? On AMC.
Yeah, suspended A-list.
Suspended A-list. Yeah, we're on the suspended. And I just started going all the time, and I just realized that like I love this. I love everything about this. I love it when I'm, with a crowd of people going to see a movie, and it's just sort of, there's something about it. I think the last movie I saw before everything shut down was Invisible Man on a Monday night. And it was a big theater here in St. Louis, and it was probably like half the 3/4 full. It's a Monday night, but it was just like a very sort of visceral experience that I would not get if I saw this thing at home. True. And so there is this certain special thing you can't sort of put your finger on about going to the theater. But you're also right. Like, if you have to go through the TSA to get in, people are not going to show up. It's already too expensive, and people have complained about pricing constantly. I think I looked at this once because I'm a nerd. The true cost of a movie ticket is double what it was in the 90s. That is, you're spending double your average income on a movie ticket than you were 25 years ago. So pricing is a huge problem. Now you have all this fear of a virus, and then you have all these like measures like the TSA temperature checks and stuff like that. I mean, I really think movie theaters are going to be in a horrific spot by the end of the year. And so I think Universal sees a little blood in the water, tastes blood in the water, and it's kind of like picking at them a bit to see how they're going to respond. Because AMC is on the verge of bankruptcy already. They're already $10 billion in debt. Rego's in a little bit better of a spot, but their movie theaters are in the weakest position they've ever been in, probably since the Great Depression. And so we'll see how it plays out. But I think this is established that premium VOD is moving forward, and it's already here, and it's not going to go away.
Right. And it just takes, like we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, we're seeing the first domino kind of fall and get back up. And eventually it's just going to come down all the way. And maybe it won't be in the next year. But I mean, seeing as how our federal government is dealing with this crisis, like I don't see 2021 looking that much better for the theater industry. No. To be honest, at this point.
Yeah, I think the virus, we're not going to have a vaccine for a long time if we ever have one. And it's just going to be a whole new world. And I don't know where theaters really fit into that. But that's sort of the VOD war. We'll keep track on that and see what happens in the next few weeks. See if PVOD takes over. Maybe Universal buys AMC, just says, screw it, we're going to buy you and shut you down.
Right, because the Paramount decree is up, right? So what's stopping them?
Studios can now buy theaters, which they haven't been able to do for like the last 60 years. So it's a whole different ball game, as they say. But let's see what people are watching at home. Let's look at the DEG most watched at home top 20 list. We might talk about the top 10. DEG's Digital Entertainment Group. They are the sort of industry standard here for all the numbers for the industry. And so they keep track of what people buy and rent at home digitally. And so this is what we got going on. This list is bizarre. And I finally understand how to read this list. So if there's no up or down, basically it's staying the same, and it will say new if it's a new entry. So number one, for whatever reason, Bad Boys for Life. Why is that? It's been out since April 14th. So a good 2 weeks.
I have a theory.
Yeah, go for it. What do you got?
I mean, it's really not a theory. I think it holds water. Well, number one was Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, which has dropped number 2, right?
Number 2, yeah.
And it was announced earlier this week that Rise of Skywalker is going to get a Disney Plus release tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, because we were kind of theorizing when they're going to do it. Then all of a sudden they announced it. It's already like May 4th.
Yeah. Wow. So to be honest, I'm surprised that it's still held at number 2. Like,
that's crazy.
I'm sure tons of people heard that and were like, okay, screw that. I'm not paying $4. I'm waiting a couple days. So
that is such an early release for that.
It's so early.
Like, when did it premiere? In December?
Yeah,
so 90 days.
December 17, I think.
So it would have been like VOD probably end of February. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because usually it takes about 8 to 9 months for it to hit a streaming service. So that's way fast. But that's a really good, I think, point as to why Bad Boys for Life on its like second or third life is now number 1 on the home charts. And then number 2, Star Wars Rise of Skywalker just drops to a single point. Another crazy one. Why is The Gentleman moving up 4 spots from last week to number 3?
I have no theory for this one.
You gotta have some sort of theory. Is Guy Ritchie brilliant? Is he really tapping into the post-pandemic world with his gritty crime drama?
Yeah, well, I wonder, like, is it, how much of this is, and we mentioned, the possibility of the UK having a big influence on this, right?
Yeah.
Compared to the domestic box office charts. But also, like, I wonder, it's not that many degrees removed from Bad Boys for Life, right?
Yeah,
like, you basically, it's a crime comedy. Like, those are 2 time-tested genres mashed together, and, like, people are probably like, oh, it's Matthew McConaughey and Hugh Grant, and it's funny, and there's guns. Why not? $4 isn't a lot of money.
But I'm not going anywhere. Like, going up. It's been out for like a month and a half, and it's rising the charts.
I mean, we'll get to the only new one on this chart, I think, in a little bit. I don't actually. Are there any new ones on this
Yeah,
chart?
there's some new, like later down. I think they're like Fantasy Island's new. Ugh.
Right. So that's what, yeah. There's nothing new in the top 10,
Yeah,
and like even like it's ridiculous. I don't know.
it's bizarre. I don't really understand it, but it's going to be number one next week. I can just feel it. What's the next one we got on the list here?
Number 4 is Sonic the Hedgehog, down a spot from last week. Yeah, I'm not sure why. It's basically trading spots with the gentleman, but it does seem like, once again, you've got families at home and they're willing to spend an extra $4 to keep the kids happy. And it's probably going to stay in the top 10 for a while, along with number 5. I know you love talking about this one.
Jumanji. Next Level, just sticking around at number 5. Been out since March 3rd, so a couple of months. And yeah, it just prints money. I don't know. I don't get it. I feel like I could like spend my lifetime studying the Jumanji films and their success, and like it'd be like a 78-year-old man with like this like tome of like why I think people love it, and he just asks a kid, is like, I don't know, the Rock's in it. Like, it's like there's no there with why it's doing so well. It's just a really perfect sort of fun movie to watch. Then number 6, Doolittle dropped 2 spots from 4 to 6. I think, again, families, they're bored. Let's watch this terrible third-rate movie with Robert Downey Jr. because there's nothing else new really going on. So I think it's one of those situations. And then Call of the Wild, I think that's mostly old people, right? In the 7th spot.
Yeah, but I still think there's a family element there that makes it kind of a safe bet. Like, you look at the top 7 here, and basically the only ones for grown-ups are Bad Boys for Life and The Gentleman, and arguably still, like, you still get teenagers, and you could, if you've got a family with teenagers, you'll probably be willing to watch those.
Yeah, so, that's true.
Number 8 is probably the most confusing one on the list to me.
Number 8 is Underwater.
Up 5
spots. Why do you gotta think? So it just got released. So these charts are like a week delayed, I think. So this one came out like Thursday or something, I want to say. And so video releases on April 14th. This movie did nothing in January. It was kind of a huge bomb. But I've heard very good things about it from like people on like horror subreddits and stuff like that. They really like this movie.
Yeah, there's some kind of some kind of element that's pushing this, that's inflating these numbers, but there's no way it can be good, right? I don't know. Maybe we need to do some research for this. And
I think I might watch it. I love Kristen Stewart. TJ Miller's in it, who's like, whatever. I think it'd be fun.
It'd be fun. I hear that he has a very gruesome death, so I would like to watch TJ Miller get ripped apart by underwater aliens.
That sounds awesome. So yeah, Underwater, very kind of strange, but it's one of those things where I think what you see on this list too is, especially with The Gentleman, like I think one of the thought processes there is, I'm never going to see this in the theater. I'm going to wait.
Yep. Exactly.
Right. And so they wait to see like a genre pieces like this for like $5. I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of worth it. That's like the right price. Number 9 was 1917. That's gotta be old people who are bored. There's nobody under 40 watching this movie. It's literally not possible. You couldn't sit through it. I've like grown to hate that movie now.
Me too.
For some reason, I don't know why I hate it. It's not a bad film. It just reeks of lazy prestige filmmaking.
Right.
And like the story's trash. Number 10, Birds of Prey, drops 2 spots down to the 10 spot. Let's just briefly talk about new movies that are on here. At 14 is Like a Boss. I forgot that came out.
Yep.
Do you remember that movie coming out? Was that like January
barely
release?
Yeah, I think so.
It probably like opened like top 3, maybe top 5. I don't know.
I think it came and went pretty quick. It was definitely one of those movies where it seemed like the trailer itself was painful to sit through and unfunny. Bad. And so, yeah, I mean, they were just getting rid of it. And I feel like I don't know what studio is this, but it should be one of those movies that, there's studios have a few of these and they're like, oh, we should have held on to this and just put it on VOD.
Oh, it's perfect for PVOD.
During the pandemic, right?
Although maybe it's not. Maybe it's like it should have been a Netflix movie. It's kind of what it feels like in my gut. And like it makes no money on PVOD. So that debuted at 14 spot on the most watched at home list. Yip Man 4, I don't know this one, but that debuted at 16. And then Fantasy Island, which I don't think you've seen it. Have you seen it?
No, I know you watched it recently.
It is surprisingly, it's incredibly stupid. Like one of the dumbest wide releases I've seen in a long time, but it's kind of fun. And it reminds me of kind of a top shelf sci-fi channel movie, I should say. And so like a sci-fi original. So it's that bad, but it has like that polish on the top end of it. So you're like, oh, but that debuted at number 18 on the list. I think Fantasy Island's going to go up because it's a fun watch. Like a Boss, I don't know. I think it just sits in the above 10 spots. Okay, cool. So that's the most watched at home list. Let's dive into, this is a good topic. Deadline's biggest flops list. Which, so obviously we talked about their most profitable film tournament that they do every year. They've been doing it for like 7 years. It's a lot of fun to look at. And it gives a lot of context to what we talk about on the podcast. Because a lot of times you say, hey, this is a single, this is a strikeout, this is whatever. But then Deadline kind of looks close at the numbers and has good sources from studios and kind of gives us a ballpark of whether the film was profitable and how profitable it was. They also get sources on movies that do terrible. And now they have the top 5 biggest flops of 2019. Let's start at number 5 actually and do Missing Link. Do you know, you're into this animation house, aren't you?
Yeah, the Leica production studios, run by the brother of Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, which is just, it's so bizarre.
Oh, interesting.
You read the story of it, and it's very much like dude's brother is a animation nerd, and actually is inspired by some cool stuff, combination I think of like anime and Nightmare Before Christmas, 90s stop motion, and they put out really interesting animated movies. And Missing Link notably won the Best Animated Feature Golden Globe this year over a number of Pixar and Disney flicks, which was a huge shock. So I think that because he's got his brother's Nike money, he doesn't really care. This probably did not faze him at all. They're making good quality animated films, and they're one of the few reliable alternatives to the Disney Mouse House. So it's fine. It is what it is.
What did it made worldwide? $26 million worldwide on this movie. It cost $100 million. So like Deadline estimates that it lost $100 million. That is a lot of money to lose. That is just an insane amount of money to throw down the drain. Coming at number 4 in Deadline's biggest flops of 2019, Gemini Man.
Yikes.
$138 million production budget. That doesn't include marketing, which could be well over $100 million for a wide release film worldwide. Global box office on that was 173. According to Deadline's calculations, it lost $111 million. I kind of really liked picking this one apart on the podcast, just because I thought it was like very obvious why this film didn't do well, right? Like it's a script from 1997.
Yep.
The story makes no sense. It's completely like there's no way any studio executive should have written a check for that. Like it makes no sense. But Ang Lee was involved, Will Smith was on board, and that ends, it's like almost inertia, right? Like they end up sort of just, okay, this, you got the right director, you got the right star. Okay, the script's 30 years old. Let's just see what happens. But they see what happens with a $140 million production budget. Like, did you think this movie had any chance whatsoever?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, none.
I mean, similar to Missing Link, though, and I mean, we'll talk about this with at least 2 of the other top 3. It feels like so much of it is just like, can you imagine if any of these studios had the foreknowledge of COVID-19, like just throwing this kind of money around like this? It just seems like they didn't give a shit. They haven't given any shits about this kind of thing for so many years. You've got an Oscar-winning director, you've got one of the biggest names in the world, and you've got like some kind of sci-fi action thing. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about the script. Just like get the names out there, and it's gonna magically make us piles of cash. And it's like, I mean, I love Ang Lee. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. Yeah. He justifiably has 2 Best Director Oscars, even though I think only one of those movies was good. He is known for just like being a guy that's willing to fuck around with the process and use new experimental camera techniques and lenses that probably wouldn't make much difference to the average moviegoer.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, he's like, okay, yeah, I'll take your money and I'm going to do what I want with it. And it might turn out great and it might turn out terrible. But I mean, he also, you remember, what was that movie? Billy Lynn's Walk Home?
Halftime Walk. Billy Lynn's Why was that one like so special? Was it like a special lens or something?
Yeah, it was like some kind of like
tech thing.
Crazy anamorphic thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Oh God, nobody saw that.
And still, they're giving this guy, $100 million to.
You better be careful. You might end up like Ron Howard and have to teach master class to make money, man. You better be careful, man. The studio, if you make a lot of money, sure, they'll give you a couple of misses, but Gemini man, you lose $100 million, you might be out. To lunch here. What's the next one on the list?
Yeah, number 3, the non-butthole cut of Cats. Should have kept the buttholes in. I guarantee you'd have less of a profit loss on this.
And this one's a little bit surprising to me because I thought that well, maybe before the trailer it was surprising, but after the trailer hit, it became basically a global joke. Immediately, like instantaneously, became the biggest joke in the world. Then obviously people were kind of like, this kind of sucks or whatever. But before, it is Cats. It's one of the most successful Broadway shows of all time. You would think that it's a musical during the holidays. Those are usually like a huge cash in. And they like run for like 3 months and, like Greatest Showman, what the hell it was called. That was terrible. But people were going to it in March. It came out in December or November, whatever. So I thought that this had a potential for that. But then when you saw the trailer, you're like, oh God, this is a train wreck. This thing lost $113 million, which I think they're lucky. Like, I'm surprised anybody bought a ticket to this. It did $74 million worldwide on a $95 million production budget. And that's probably a lie. Like, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'm sure the production budget was way higher than this because of all the the CGI stuff they had to do. They sent out a new cut of it like 2 days after it was released. Yeah.
Well, and there's infamous stories about Hooper like in the editing room until like 11:59 p.m. before he was supposed to send it to the studio.
That's amazing. Hooper. But it's awful. I've seen it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I have seen it. And you know what? I kind of enjoyed it.
Oh my God.
I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't nearly as bad as people were making fun of it for. It's just a stupid movie. It's dumb. Yeah. The Broadway show is not really all that good.
Well, that's the thing. You had somebody that was all about sincerity doing something that you needed to have some kind of self-awareness and campiness.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the guy who made the King's Speech, really? That's you're going with to do, Dame Judi Dench as a Calico? No.
It is. I mean, the reason that it's enjoyable, it's such big of a train wreck. Like that's kind of like it's just so awful.
Well, I guarantee half of the revenue from this movie is probably people seeing it because it's horrible.
Yeah, it's ironic. It's ironic revenue. And so that was lost $113 million. Terminator Dark Fate in the number 2 spot.
Yikes.
Shooting it out with another franchise here. Dark Fate cost $185 million. They brought everybody back for this one. That's why it cost so much. Only did 261 worldwide. Deadline says it lost $123 million. This one's not a surprise at all. Is it a surprise to you? I mean,
actually, it is and it isn't. It's the only one of the top 5 that I actually paid money for to go see.
Oh my God. And you saw this in the theater?
Oh yeah, wow. I did. Wow. I don't know why. Actually, I think it was right when I got signed up for A-list, and I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna go.
Going over.
Like a Tuesday night. It was like me and some 50-year-old woman sharing the theater together. But so like I am surprised a little bit because it is definitely a step up from the last couple Terminator movies.
It looks like it.
And similar to like Underwater, I feel like it's one of these movies where you've got some pretty high profile critics that were giving it some cred. It's not a good movie. I don't know why they gave it cred, but there's a certain kind of fondness that sci-fi action nerds still have for this franchise, and when it's placed in the hands of somebody that isn't regrettable, like McG was for Terminator Salvation, you'd think that it would spark some kind of interest, but it's just boring. It's just retread. They didn't do anything interesting. the Sarah Connor Chronicles did. Like if they had done something completely different like that.
Don't bring it up. Don't bring it
and
up.
put Linda Hamilton front and center, like it could have been something very special, but they didn't.
As someone who worships the first two, I worship the first two Terminator films. They are two of like two of my favorite movies. I hate the third one. The only thing that they've done since then is the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and like they broke my heart when they canceled it. And I was like, I'm done with Terminator. I haven't seen it. I've like watched parts of all the recent movies. I can't get through any of them because they're just so
bad.
It's just the brand has been completely tanked from poor quality movies. Why don't you do number one for us? Not a surprise to anybody.
The only one of the franchise that I did not pay a ticket for. Since
you saw Apocalypse?
Oh yeah, hell I saw it.
Oh, Jesus.
Totally regret it. But yeah, it's Dark Phoenix, of course, at number one here, which I still haven't seen, and I've heard is somehow worse than Apocalypse. But yeah, Apocalypse, you can definitely draw a correlation, no matter, if Dark Phoenix did turn out to actually be good or at least decent. Like so many of us X-Men fans were burned by Apocalypse that there's no way they could have revived this franchise. They should have just let it stay dead after that. And there was many. You probably have a better recollection of this because you were doing the podcast solo when this was just tanking. What do you think was like the key reason besides just the tarnished brand of X-Men and the 20th Century Fox style of superhero movie making that made this do so poorly?
Well, I think the thing that's like stood out to me was one, the Apocalypse fiasco, which was clearly a fiasco from the moment the first trailer dropped. And you're like, X-Men is so tired. It is so boring. It has no relation to what's going on with the rest of the comic movies. At all. It's a completely different art form. And for some reason, and the Deadline did a really great write-up on why they greenlit Dark Phoenix. And you read this like recap and you're like, this industry is so screwed up that like they think that, and you know what it was? It was that chummy backroom deal stuff.
Right.
Where some producer know this person and they thought, oh, maybe we should. I think internally Fox thought that Apocalypse failed just because it was like a one-off failure, that there wasn't a systemic problem with the X-Men property.
Gotcha.
And so with Dark Phoenix, it was sort of like, hey, yeah, let's double down on this. And let's like take a story that, is famous in the X-Men lore. And like, I think it's a much longer story in reality and can put it into one movie. It was supposed to be two movies. And they jam-packed it into one. And at the end of the day, you had a terrible movie matched with a brand awareness that is essentially, this series sucks now. You're going to get a loser like this.
Right.
And this thing lost $133 million. And I think people got fired for it. I'm pretty sure some executives got let go.
I sure hope so.
Because like, why would you pour money into something like this? Just let Marvel take it over. They know what they're
doing. And from like a comic geek standpoint, it's especially annoying because they already attempted to do some version of the Phoenix story with X-Men 3.
Yeah.
And that was a terrible movie too. And so like, I remember being very reticent going to see X-Men First Class, being like, all right, I'll give it a shot because it's gotten decent reviews. But like, I was really impressed that they were able to like bring that series back. And I actually think Days of Future Past is pretty good as well. But
interesting take.
But I know I've been watching and like being obsessed with X-Men since I was like 6. So
you're a big X-Men guy.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for the Gambit Channing Tatum movie. So
I can't wait. It's never gonna happen. Never gonna happen. I still have stock in it at Highwood Stock Exchange. It's like 2 cents a share. I'm never giving up. So that was Deadline's list. We have some additions that we think should have been on the list or maybe in the top 10. We'll shoot these back and forth. So I had Shaft on here. Which does anybody remember this movie coming out? Anybody?
Barely. Only because I listened to this podcast.
I covered it extensively. This thing that had a $30 million budget. And again, these don't include marketing budgets. Like marketing budget could be $40-50 million just domestically for something like this. $30 million only does $21 million worldwide box office. So like just to put that in perspective, the take home there for the studio at max is going to be 50%. It's not 50% because internationally they get less. So they took home $10 million for that on a 30 million plus. Now, the only one that's kind of, so I think it should be kind of in the top 10. The only silver lining with Shaft is I think they pre-sold distribution on Netflix to some foreign areas. So like maybe the reason it didn't do great worldwide is because it was going to be on Netflix pretty soon in different areas. But still, this thing should have opened to $30 million domestically and closed out at like 70.
Well, I do think that part of the key issue is similar to what we were talking about with both Dark Phoenix and Dark Fate, is that you're trying to revive or continue a franchise without bringing anything new to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was nothing new. It was just sort of like, hey, we have another one, and now we have 3 shafts.
Yeah,
and you're like, wait, what? Did I ask for this? Is this for me? No, it's for nobody.
The original Samuel L. Jackson Shaft was like a nice surprise because nobody saw it coming, and this one is just like, you're so far removed. Like only people in my generation and a little older that are like super into movies even remember the Samuel L. Jackson Shaft from 2000 or whenever that was.
Yeah, exactly. It's like and then that one's a remake of and it's like, oh god, you go down the remake circle, feedback loop. Why don't you do one of yours?
Yeah, so my top pick I'm surprised it's not in the top 5, is The Goldfinch, with a 49 million budget and 10 million worldwide. And I mean, maybe the P&A is. Do you think that D'Alessandro took that into account for his list?
I think he did. Yeah, he did. Okay. For his list, he did take P&A into account. Yeah.
So I do think, perhaps the reason it didn't make it into his top 5 is like, I think the studio saw the final cut of this movie based on one of the best-selling novels of all time, and we're like, okay, yeah, let's trim back that P&A budget.
I love when they do that.
Yeah.
They see that they get the test scores like, yikes, I'm out of here.
Right.
I need to transfer.
It's still so much money lost even if you just look at the production budget, and even if you imagine maybe they did another 20 or 30.
Yeah, that's about right. I would say. Yeah. It's
crazy, especially because not only of its source material, but it was poised, like you had Roger Deakins doing cinematography on this. And it's like you're poising it for award season as well, and it's so terrible.
Yeah, it was a prestige play,
right?
Like they're like, yeah, let's get this in awards, and then like I can't remember. I think it premiered at Toronto, maybe. Yeah, and the first like reviews are like, wow, this is not going to go well. But I was really floored how poorly it did, because I assumed with the book it would have a built-in audience. Mm-hmm. And like maybe half of that audience showed up, maybe a quarter.
Oh, I know. I mean, I read the book and loved it, and I didn't show up.
Yeah.
And I go see anything. I saw Terminator Dark Fate. So
yeah, no one's happy about the Goldfinch. One on my list here is Hellboy. Had a 50. I don't even remember this one coming out. I do remember, but then I also don't remember at the same time. $50 million production budget, $41 million worldwide. Who? Why? I mean, like, why are you doing this? This is a remake of a remake? No. What was the original Hellboy? Was it like 97 or something? Guillermo del Toro?
Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman, and it's pretty well beloved in terms of like late 90s
people like that
superhero movies.
But why would you do another one? I don't. Yeah. And Ron Perlman, is he in it? I don't think he's even in it.
No, it's David Harbour from Stranger Things, and like I like him, but he's not an A-list star. So like, what are you going for here?
I saw him on the Off-Camera interview show, which is like one of my favorite shows. Watch that if you really like him.
Okay.
It'll give you a different vibe about him. Oh, he comes across as like very, I could go on and on about it, but it'll give you a different read.
He's going to ruin him for me, huh?
At 100%. Or what's one on your list?
The next one I had was The Kid Who Would Be King, incredibly forgotten. Like I think February kids movie.
Yeah.
With a 59 million budget, 32 million worldwide. Makes a third of its production budget alone, and we know that kid movies have tons of P&A pushed into them, even when they're like on the shelf and supposed to be. Like, I also considered putting Ugly Dolls on my list. Like, there's so many kids movies that just like lose terrific amounts of money if they don't have a connection to an existing property.
Yeah.
And this is one of those. Like, I still haven't seen it. Like my 8-year-old's best friend is like, oh yeah, I watched this movie on the airplane. Like, he went on a vacation somewhere a couple of months ago, and he's like, I never heard of it before. And my 8-year-old is like, I've never heard of it. Like, my 8-year-old consumes so much media, and if he's never heard of your movie, much less wanted to go see it, like, that means you really failed. So
yeah, the marketing on that movie was all over the place.
it just looks so bad. Ugh, gosh. Too bad. What about you?
Did it look worse than Cold Pursuit, which is a genre movie that came out last January with Liam Neeson? $60 million production budget worldwide, 62. I was surprised by this number when I looked it up.
Yeah, I thought it was actually a decent performer, but no, that's bad.
Happened is that I think worldwide it fell apart. Like domestically, it was like okay, but that's gonna be like even for a small play. I think my read on that was like, oh, this is pretty good, with like domestic stuff. But then when it tried to go outside of that, you're making $62 million worldwide on a movie like that. You got to have a global product. Yeah. Like if you're spending $50 million to make a movie, it's got to play in Brazil, it's got to play in Russia, it's got to play in the UK and Australia. If you don't, then you're screwed. And I think Cold Pursuit got screwed.
Yes.
What's the next one of yours?
Yeah. Should we wrap this up? It'll be my last one, and
go for it.
We'll close it up. What a sad movie to end on. The Kitchen, starring
Terrible
Melissa
film.
McCarthy and Elizabeth Moss. What was this movie even trying to be? I still don't know if it was more of a drama or more, or is there comedy at all?
I thought it was
Tiffany
a
Haddish
comedy
in it too.
At first. Yeah, but it's not. It's a drama.
Why do you have two of the funniest female actors in show business today on your poster and top build, and you don't even make it comedic at all?
Oh, it wasn't even apparent what it was though. Like, no one had any clue. I saw the trailer multiple. I was like, wait, this isn't a cooking comedy.
I know the name problem. This is the rhythm section all over again.
Oh God, don't make me ill. The
worst. What the heck? And to boot, it was probably one of the worst reviewed movies of the year as well. And it's just too bad because like this is a good cast. This is Andrea Berloff, the director of Straight Outta Compton. And like, why? It's so sad. Why are you doing this to yourselves?
Yeah, it's
also one of those things.
Like DOA though, I feel like
exactly. Yeah. They were just like shove it out. Yeah, so that was 39 million budget and 15.8 worldwide.
I love closing on flops. It's great to talk about disasters in the box office. What we'll do next week is we have some. We'll talk about Deadline's biggest profits for small movies, and we'll sort of brighten it up next week. That's all we have, folks. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. This has been the Wildline Podcast with Dan and
Chris. Thanks so much, guys. See you next week, and enjoy some movie watching at home.